Hi all, I have another fascinating Blitz game to show you at the Super GM level. Mamedyarov was playing against Magnus Carlsen in the Grand Chess Tour Paris. So this is quite a recent game. I'm not giving up totally to the current events, but because there's some interesting games on this one which we haven't seen yet. So d4, and Magnus plays d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, c6, and now this move queen c2, which if you've just started off the Slav, you might just be wanting to set up the triangle without further ado and play for things like knight d7, bishop d6, and later, you know, take an e5. That's the kind of routine. But actually, there is justification to react here with the third most popular move in Libit, which is g6. Simple ideas, fianchetto, and also a tempo game with bishop f5, which helps, you know, light square control if the bishop's on that diagonal. Let's see, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, black castles, and now we have this tempo game. So how useful is it? It does neglect b7, that is pounced on, but then Magnus just plays queen b6 here. He doesn't mind the double pawns. If white really wants to double the pawns here, he didn't, but this position's activating a rook, and so there's some compensation. Here, for example, it's okay for black. In fact, technically, black's fine. More than fine. Slight advantage even. So I don't think there's any point taking there. So we have a situation where white just castles here. Rook d8. And really, yeah, this whole configuration doesn't seem entirely bad at all. Queen a3, knight a6, and all of a sudden the bishop's actually useful for knight b4 to c2. We have c5, which is closing down the centre, but it means that later e5 is going to be more painful for white. This tension being resolved, sometimes it makes e5 more effective. The queen doesn't even go back actually to c7. It sticks around. She sticks around, not fearing, you know, potential stuff which might trap the queen later. e3, which kind of sets the scene that, you know, maybe bishop f1 later is going to be a concern, but now there's knight b4 threatening knight c2. Simple stuff. Queen c3. The queen is wasting a bit of time here. a5. Okay, so that's a nice move because it actually means queen a6 potentially if a4, and in fact that's what happens. a4, queen a6, where the knight is protected by the pawn and the knight's still threatening some stuff, like to go into these two squares at some point. And in fact, the knight uses d3 here. On c2, I'm not sure it's doing anything there on c2. Maybe the rook just moves to a2. Let's have a quick look. Just rook a2. But even this is fine for black, it seems. Technically, this is yeah, there's no harm in going to c2 basically, even if that was played. But maybe even better is to play for e5 with knight d7 potentially, or b6. This pawn chain's a bit fragile to either b6 or e5 right now, as pawn breaks to try and expose white's underlying weaknesses. Knight d3 though is played, rook d1. Now this does create a weakness of the last move, which is tapped into. Maybe safer would have been something like knight h4, but it seems really awkward. Just bishop g4 and black's fine. This e5, it's supported a bit by the knight, and it kind of hopes to open up this diagonal. So this is really an unpleasant position for white anyway, as it stands. This just made it more unpleasant, I think, after knight g4. The rook goes back. I know. Maybe Mamedyarov was this is not his best ever blitz, not blitz game, rapid. Sorry, this is not his best ever blitz game. So bishop h6 now threatens things like knight takes f2, bishop takes e3. White protects the e3 point, but now this e5 comes, and it's very dangerous to take, you know, because it's really exposing this diagonal, and there's two knights which are supporting e5 here. But after bishop d2, bishop g7 anyway, knight a3, maybe trying to reinforce d4, but knight f6 is now played. Yeah, this is a really unpleasant position. Knight e1. And now Magnus plays actually a really interesting move. Can you guess if I give you 5 seconds? This is a bit of a killer blow, it seems. So what would you play with black here? It seems, you know, white's trying to chase away this advanced knight. Does the knight want to retreat back? Well, I know it's protected by the bishop at the moment, though, but even so, it doesn't even mind the interruption, knight e4 here, hitting the queen. So let's see what's going on here. Why can't queen, you know, queen takes d3? Because there is an interruption of its protection. I think queen takes d3, let's have a look. Knight takes d2 after hits the rook, and d3. And if something like this is just horrible. Yeah, doesn't even need to take on d3. Maybe even better is just taking on d4. But this is fine as well. This is all very good for black, this position. You can see that the structure has been it's been weakened at base, with the bishop nicely pointing at d4. This is a very unpleasant position for white. So knight e4 seems really cool. Bishop takes e4, but now not the routine capture here even. Sorry, he does play the routine capture here, but it's after knight takes d3. It's this position, not the routine capture of taking a knight, but instead e takes d4, and white's centre is collapsing. Queen takes d3. And that's it. Yeah, white's in a really miserable position. His centre's just been destroyed by Magnus Carlsen. 24 moves. Magnus made it look really easy, but he is adapting his setup to white's queen c2 in this game, which is why I thought this was a kind of notable game if you've just started out with the Slav, and you know, you bear in mind exactly, you know, the flexibility requirements, and you know, to get the more effective setups against white's play. So I hope you got something out of that. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.